Well, good morning and a very happy Monday to you. So, another Geospatial-Next talk. Didn't manage one on Friday, so we'll do a Monday one. Today we're very business centric. Title of today's talk is How Geospatial-Next Can Give You a Very Powerful Business Development Edge. Let's dive in. So let me begin just by saying I'm going to reflect on parts of my career. A big chunk of this actually is around Web Map Solutions and the work that I did there with that startup that I was involved with a number of years ago. So some of the things you're going to see there here in this presentation actually would be built off of that learning experience in large part from there. But I will be pulling from other parts of my career. No specific reference points when I've worked for in this presentation. So let's just talk about business development yesterday and today. There's a certain pattern that we can see. So the how we do business development today in geospatial and the GIS industry is really around a number of key areas. So relationships are obviously critical. Partnerships are another area that people get focused in and drive a lot of revenue through very specific strategic partnerships. RFPs are a big deal where there's, particularly within the public sector, big requirement documents that come out that people bid against. Trade shows are key. The 𝐏𝐨𝐰 was just a couple of weeks ago. A lot of business is done at the 𝐏𝐴, I know. And then there's traditional marketing. I've seen organizations begin to do either be quite sophisticated in traditional marketing or build out their traditional marketing presence. But obviously traditional marketing is very important. That's having obviously a website and articles and blogs and all the things that go into that sort of world of marketing. But a lot of these conversations that I've seen, and again, within Web Map Solutions, we tended to be a little bit technology-led in terms of the conversations we have. And we were actually a mobile development company, so a lot of it was around kind of the mobile world, but it was very much sort of centered around technology. And we were mostly talking to GIS and IT folks. So that's kind of sets the stage for where I believe, and there could be additions to this list, but where I see sort of business development today in the geospatial GIS world. But there is a big challenge, particularly in the geospatial services world, a business development challenge. And that challenge is, what makes you stand out? There's a lot of competition out there. People, not just now within the US, where I'm based, but also internationally, who are now offering GIS and geospatial services. So how do you stand out? What makes you unique? That's the critical question we've all got to ask ourselves as we start to explore generating revenue, building solutions that are valuable to customers. That went quickly. So I'm going to propose that part of the value of the Geospatial-Next conversation from a business development perspective is really what it's driving to is engaging in business-led what next conversations with key decision makers. Let me read that again. Engaging in business-led what next conversations with key decision makers. In the last talk that I did, I spoke about getting into what next conversations, and that's really, I believe, at the core of Geospatial-Next, and why I believe the whole Geospatial-Next conversation or discussion is absolutely critical. So how would I see us implement what we're talking about here? How to get to a business development next strategy and plan? Well, let's talk strategy first. The first thing to do, yes, we do need to build a strategy and then execute that strategy. Now, Roger Martin's a guy that I've read some of his books and seen him online, and he's very good at defining strategy. And I've often get confused what strategy is and actually get strategy and plan mixed up. But his formal definition is strategy is an integrated set of choices that uniquely position your firm in its industry, enabling it to create sustainable advantage and superior value relative to competition. Bit of a mouthful, that. But it's the foundational piece against which we need to build a plan and execute against. So let's just dive into that a little bit more depth, and I'll color it with an example. So building a strategy. According to Martin, there are actually, I think there's 4 or 5 pieces to his. I'll just talk about 4. You have to generate a winning aspiration or create a winning aspiration. That's number 1. Number 2, where will you play? Number 3, how will you win? And then number 4, what capabilities must we have? So let me kind of color this picture a little bit with an example. And this actually goes back some years in some of the work that I did historically. So we built a strategy that was really defined at that sort of winning aspiration level. We weren't really looking to how do we increase our sales from last year in a particular sector. We were really focused on being the leading geospatial solution provider in transportation. So that was kind of our big aspirational goal. So where were we going to play? We decided that safety was our critical area of focus. So we really focused all our energies in that area of safety, which we knew was a very, very high area of value, if you like, but need within DOTs. Safety is the #1 priority. And how were we going to win? And again, I'll expand on this a little bit in the next slide, but we decided we would leverage new geospatial data and technology to improve insight and to provide a real-time pulse on the organization. So we really decided we were going to take the whole Geospatial-Next, the evolution of geospatial, which is sort of that's under the umbrella term Geospatial-Next by my definition, and leverage that within the world of transportation with a focus on safety. Now, I'll talk a little bit in the next slide about capabilities, but we won't need to do that in next. I mean, capabilities is really what you've got in-house and what you can bring to bear to solve particular problems. So that's building the strategy. Now, I kind of call this a framework. It's not really, it's really a series of steps. People do this formally or informally. This is stuff that when I was working at Web Map Solutions and my focus was really business development entirely, I realized we needed to execute against kind of a plan. So we had an overarching strategy, but we were really trying to think, okay, how do we navigate through these waters? So let me kind of walk through this, and then I'll kind of again paint the picture using the transportation example. So I think if there is a tendency to try to go to market really quickly. Go to market is obviously the sort of the money side of solution providing or product development, but it really starts with ideation. So ideation is really that throwing ideas around internally, externally, collaboratively to come up with essentially problems. Second part of that is customer discovery. So the first two parts of this are what I've seen historically and what I've made the mistake of being the least focused part of this whole journey. Customer discovery really entails three things. Customer discovery entails taking ideas around problems and bringing those to customers, plural. So not just one customer, multiple customers. So exploring the problem. Is it a real problem that they struggle with? Does it have high value? I mean, value is a relative term, but if it's if you're looking to, if it's a $10 solution, that may not be fit with what your business model is. If it's a $1 million solution, they may fit more closely with what you're thinking about. But it's at this stage you find this out. It's also at this stage you have a sort of a cursory look across the competitive landscape as well. So this 1 and 2 are really where a lot of focus need to be put. Number 3 is kind of this solution exploration. That kind of goes back to what we were seeing in the last slide. What capabilities do we have? Do we have the capabilities in-house to build out a solution to the particular problem that we validated with customers? We discovered, validated, do we have a solution to the problem? If we don't, there's a potential place to build a partnership. So this is less about go-to-market partnerships, much more about solution partnerships. If you're in this new world where we've got machine learning, we've got all these new data sources, are there startups, are there other companies out there that can actually help provide, in partnership with yourself, the capabilities to provide a solution? This is a mistake I've made in the past, where I've actually looked at, not really dived deep enough into the business model. So again, going back to Web Map Solution days, there were times where we kind of skipped over the business model, particularly when you're looking internally about how you're going to make money. Maybe you've got others in the mix, but defining a business model at this point is absolutely critical. Call this an MVS, you could call it an MVP, but a minimum viable solution. Often going to proof of concepts is a good path, particularly if it's new. And Geospatial-Next is, more often than not, new conversations. So to actually proof out a solution against the problem is kind of critical. It brings together the customer, yourself, and builds trust And most importantly, I think it ultimately describes, if you think you've isolated the problem and the solution doesn't solve that problem, can you tweak that approach to make it work? So there's a lot to that whole proof of concept phase, or minimum viable solution. The next one's obvious, the number 7, which is the solution. So that may be a product, it may simply be a solution that you're going to take to market. Can that solution be leveraged across the enterprise? Can that solution be applicable to other organizations in a similar place? And then there's the go-to-market piece. So I'll just illustrate this with an example. So again, in transportation, the strategy was to be focused around safety. One of the areas that we realized that was critical to the safety conversation was actually fixing problems. So safety engineers go out and fix problems. So the journey we went on in trying to discover that is how do safety engineers actually go out today and navigate, isolate what the problem is and fix it. And in general terms, there are multiple steps to it, but in general terms, geospatial was used at the first stage, but not latterly. So the first stage was getting the crash information on a 2-dimensional map, seeing heat maps and clustering and isolating where, in a city, for example, the most problematic intersections are. Problematic is high numbers of serious injuries and deaths. Once they've isolated that, usually what happens is they'll go out and actually look at that intersection, measure it, look at overhanging vegetation, etc., etc. And then from there, it's sort of a mixture of ways to get to a place where they put in place, for example, a roundabout. So the journey was interesting. So I spent quite a lot of time with it, a group of us spent quite a lot of time kind of understanding in that sort of 1 and 2 phases in that diagram, what that workflow looked like today. And if there were gaps in that workflow, we felt that we could leverage geospatial data and technology to solve. And we found there was. So what we did was we really told a data story to those guys. And it was a couple of particular DOTs that we were working with on this. What we realized was we could actually build a 3-dimensional version of intersections using LiDAR, etc. So we did that. We actually created a 2-dimensional map, allowed the engineers to click on a particular intersection, and it actually then loaded in a web browser a 3-dimensional version of that intersection. So they could actually see, without having to drive out to the site, what that intersection looked like. They could measure it. We also added additional data to it, so point data where crashes were, and other sort of additional data sets that they couldn't have had they been out in the field. We also added some real-time data to it as well, a little bit of movement data, so from vehicles, and we also got harsh braking, harsh acceleration information, and added that to it as well. So we built this story for them, which was leveraging geospatial data and new technology, since it was 2D, 3D, and 4D, and we showed them a completely different journey to actually arrive at diagnosing a problem, which they'd never seen before. So it was a great piece of work. That was it was excellent to see the reaction of the DOT folks at quite a senior level on what we showed them. So there's kind of a journey to describe how we moved, or at least historically, I've sort of leveraged these kind of frameworks to help not only sort of build out a very focused strategy, but also then execute against that strategy, very much working with customers and engaging in really what next conversations. So we're moving beyond how they were traditionally doing things to a new way of doing things. And I think that's the journey that we're on. I think all the pieces I've described here are important, so trade shows and all the other things of traditional marketing are all super important. But to get into those what next conversation is really what we all have to be aiming for. And it's ultimately going to give those organizations that take that approach, those individuals that take that approach, the edge. So interested in any feedback, any thoughts you might have, feel free to reach back to me, and thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us on the Geospatial-Next channel. We're focused here on understanding the future of geospatial. That's both how we get to mainstream adoption of the technology and data, and how we start using blockchain and crypto to move things forward. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.